All right, thank you everyone for joining us for today's presentation, the 5 must-haves of a DRaaS solution, so disaster recovery as a service. Before we get started, 2 quick housekeeping announcements. One is simply that you're going to receive a copy of this presentation to the email that you provided when you registered. We are recording as well, so you'll be receiving that in addition. And then we'll be sending you a copy of these presentation slides as well. Also, there is a question tool in the GoToWebinar software. Please ask questions throughout the presentation. We will come to Q&A at the end of the presentation. And we are going to be giving away a free prize to one of today's participants as well. So definitely ask lots of relevant on-topic questions for your chance to win that free prize today. So a quick introduction to today's presenters. We have Vice President of Marketing, Dean Nichols, and I'm Carla Federigo. I'm the Online Marketing Manager here at InfraScale.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And you see our contact information on the screen as well. Please do feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions after the webinar that maybe don't get covered today. So let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda for today. So first we're going to cover the problem, then we'll be looking at the 5 must-haves of a DRaaS solution. We'll cover our mission and we'll talk a bit about the cloud failover appliance, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Now I'd like to do a quick poll before we jump in. So you'll be seeing this poll come up in just 1 second as soon as I launch it here. We just want to get a little information from you. So we love to hear from our participants, and we really want to be able to cater this to your needs and to your company. So if you could let us know, we're simply asking how big is your company, and we have a quick poll up here. Looks like 35% of you have voted so far, so I'll give you all a minute to go ahead and vote. Okay, it looks like 58% of you have voted so far, not 63, so I'll leave this up for just another minute to give everyone a chance to respond. Great, and now it looks like the majority of you have voted. We have quite a mix today. So we have 23% who have said 0 to 100, 35% said 100 to 500, 23% again with 500 to 1,000, and then 19% at 1,500 plus. So I'll go ahead and close that, and then we'll dive into the presentation. So the first thing we're going to cover is really the problem. So I want to introduce a few of the problems and some of the trends that are really hastening the growth of DRaaS. I'm sure many of you have experienced some of these firsthand as well, so it's definitely going to sound familiar to some of you, I'm sure. So this chart here shows 2 different stories. On the left, you see just how pervasive downtime really is. 91% of data center managers that we surveyed have experienced some downtime in the last 2 years. 47% experienced an outage this year. And then on the right, you see the top causes of downtime. Perhaps not surprisingly, hardware failures and human error together account for over 3/4 of all downtime. Natural disasters really just account for 5% of the total. So when we talk about disaster recovery, we're usually talking about how to recover from both micro and macro disasters. Now, all organizations, independent of size, suffer significant financial losses for every second, minute, or hour of disruption. Aberdeen calculated the average cost per hour of downtime for all respondents reported some of these stats. So the average downtime cost per hour was over $163,000. Small companies lost over $8,000 per hour. And medium-sized firms lost over $215,000 per hour. Finally, large organizations reported losses of over $600,000 per hour. What's even more scary is the survival rate. So 98% of businesses cannot survive more than a day without downtime. And if you're a smaller company, being down for 24 hours is definitely going to kill your business. So downtime really is expensive and can cripple your business.
Thanks, Carla. The next trend I want to talk about is really the evolution of DRaaS. What makes this space really confusing is all different definitions that people use to describe DR. For some, storing tapes off-site is DR. For others, having a secondary site, or what we call high availability failover, is what's required. So let's look at some of the different definitions of DR and evaluate their trade-offs. It's fair to consider that most of you will probably want to evaluate your options based on several values, including the RTO and RPO and the overall cost of the solution. When we're talking about RPO, we're talking about recovery point objective. And that really refers to the amount of data that's at risk. It's determined by the amount of time between backups and reflects the amount of data that potentially could be lost during a disaster recovery event. RTO, on the other hand, or recovery time objective, is related to downtime. This metric is often used to refer to the amount of time it takes to recover from data loss and how long it takes to return yours back to service. Again, you might have noticed a trend as you move down the chart. You can either have really a low-cost solution but sacrifice RPO and RTO in the process, or you can have a great RTO, great RPO in the case of like high availability, but it's going to cost you big time, right? Of course, what companies really want is what you see on the bottom, right? They want a fantastic RTO, a great RPO, all at a low cost that we can all afford. And on top of that, what they really want is the ability to fail over in minutes and using more of the cloud and less hardware with security baked in. So enter DRaaS, or Disaster Recovery as a Service. It can deliver really on this promise if you can find the right vendor. The next slide here talks about some of the trends that we've also unearthed with our own study. Part of what's interesting about DRaaS is really not all that well understood. In a survey of companies ranging from 100 to 5,000 employees, most businesses said they couldn't fail over to a second location. In fact, only 10% of the companies surveyed said they could fail over within 15 minutes. So why haven't they invested in failover? Well, the number one reason that's holding them back is the perceived high cost of disaster recovery solutions. After that, having kind of insufficient IT resources and solution complexity were the next highest barriers to adoption. By the way, if you want a copy of the report that outlines many of these findings, you can actually go to the handout section, and we've uploaded the report there, and you can just download it for your edification. Great. Carla, over to you.
Okay, so now we're going to move to the 5 must-haves of a modern DRaaS solution. But should we do another poll, Dean?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So let's go ahead and do one more poll here. So we have another question for you. Let's see. How about failover DR? Which of these is you? So let's launch this poll here. You have a couple of options that you see on your screen now regarding failover DR. That should be popping up in just a moment. There you go. Okay, so 10% have voted so far. Okay, so failover DR, which of these is you? First is, I can fail over to a second site in under 60 minutes already. Or, I wish I had failover DR but can't afford it. Or simply, I don't think I need failover DR. Right now, the high majority, about 50%, are saying, I wish I had failover DR but can't afford it. So that's pretty interesting. We are going to talk about that in just a moment later in the presentation. And then 35% of you are saying, I can already fail over to a second site in 60 minutes. 15% say, I don't think I need failover DR. Really curious about that 15% of you who don't think you need failover DR. I'm curious as to why. I would love to hear from you. You can use the question tool to speak to us. All right, thanks everyone for your participation in that. We'll go ahead and jump back into the presentation. So now we're turning to the 5 must-haves of a modern DRaaS solution. So 1 is don't break the bank. 2, boot from anywhere. 3, protect everything. 4, get off the hardware hamster wheel. And 5, find an integrated solution. So let's get into more details for each of these. First, don't break the bank. So we just saw that some vendors can achieve the RTO and the RPO that we want, but they just simply can't achieve the cost that we want. Well, here on the left, you see why. This is how most DR solutions are architected. You have the production site that replicates to the failover site, just like you see here, and then because of the bandwidth, the people, and the software involved, it can cost up to 3 times as much to set up a DR solution. On top of the expense to implement, it's really complex to test and to use. It's vulnerable to hackers, and security isn't built in. What you'll see is that InfraScale delivers on-demand failover, but at the price point of a backup scenario.
Great. The second must-have for a DRaaS solution is the ability to boot from anywhere. And so if you're looking at current DRaaS solutions, pay special attention to this must-have. Earlier we talked about micro and macro disasters and the importance of protecting your business against both types of outages. But in order to recover quickly from micro disasters, probably appliance-based failover is the way to go. With appliance boot, you can spin up and virtualize VMs, really your critical business applications, from local appliances while your IT crew works to fix the source problem. And because the appliance is local, the time it takes to virtualize VMs can be measured in seconds. But now, let's say you're trying to recover from a flood, for example. In this case, you'll probably need cloud-based virtualization, so something that we call cloud boot. If your server is underwater, good luck trying to booting up VMs from there. But with cloud boot, you can spin up VMs in the cloud and let your users access those applications and stay productive. This takes a little bit longer than booting from the appliance, but it's the only way to keep your users productive during a site-wide disaster. In addition to the flexibility of booting locally or in the cloud, you'll also want the flexibility of booting VMs from different kinds of environments. So you want to, depending on your environment, you may want to be able to boot from VMware or Hyper-V, or actually the ability to boot from physical environments like Windows or Linux. Another key must-have, and this is number 3, is the ability to protect all of your data, all of your applications, and all of your devices. But you want a solution that really can boot, that can back up any device. So we start on the far left. What I'm talking about here is the ability to back up not only your servers, which could be physical and virtual, but the ability to back up laptops and mobile devices as well. You want the ability to support really just about any OS, or certainly the operating systems that you're running. So for many of you, that may not be just Windows. You may want to find a solution that can back up Linux, Unix, and IBM AIX as well. You want the ability to deploy in any form. And what I'm talking about here is really, in some cases, you may want to have a physical appliances, but in other cases, you may have your own hardware and would prefer to have a virtual appliance. And then lastly, you may want to deploy agent-level backups as well. You also want to be able to store it in any cloud. This is also super important because many vendors will lock you into their cloud, right? With InfraScale, we give you the ability to back up to our cloud, but you can also back up to your own private cloud or leverage popular third-party clouds like Amazon Web Services. And the last thing, which we talked about in the previous slide, is you want the ability to boot anywhere, the ability to boot from the appliance or the cloud and have the choice to do either. InfraScale lets you protect all of your data, whether we're talking mobile devices, desktops, laptops, physical and virtual servers, and we support over 100 versions of operating systems.
So that's going to bring us to number 4, exploit cloud spillover. So why buy an appliance? You end up filling it up, and then you buy another one, then fill it up, buy another one again, and continue this circle. That's really the old way of doing it, where more space equals more appliance. But let me tell you instead about the InfraScale way. So what if you could get the last hardware appliance that you'd ever need? A slim rack mount unit, a 1U unit, and that uses our cloud spillover technology. So our smallest model has about 4 terabytes of limit to the internal capacity, but we have bigger units that store up to 100 terabytes. Yet it doesn't matter if you send it 4 terabytes or 100. And how do we do that? Well, we can do this by intelligently spilling data over to the device from the cloud. As Gartner said when they wrote about us in their Cool Vendor report, InfraScale says that when you need more space, get a bigger cloud, not a bigger appliance, and really get off the hardware hamster wheel. Then that brings us to number 5, find an integrated solution. So the problem with traditional DR and backup solutions, they make you pick for, sort of lack of a better phrase, one of your children to save. And you can protect physical servers, virtual servers, and desktops on one hand, or laptops, mobile devices, and branch offices on the other. Well, that just doesn't make sense to protect only one pool of data. You should have a solution that lets you protect all of your data and doesn't ignore any of it. With traditional purpose-built backup appliances like Commvault or EMC, when you buy an appliance, that's pretty much everything that you get. If you want DR or WAN acceleration, it all costs extra, or they bake in a healthy percentage of the quote for professional services on top of that. So it's really important to know where the vendor's DNA is. These vendors have their DNA in hardware, and that's where a good chunk of their margins exist. The cloud is relatively new to them, and they're playing catch-up. So merging cloud-centric solutions like InfraScale bake all of this functionality and cloud goodness into really every backup appliance.
Great. So now that we've covered the 5 must-haves, I want to talk a little bit about us and the InfraScale. So our mission is pretty simple. We want to eradicate downtime. But what we really mean by that is that we want to equip every business with the ability to quickly and affordably recover from any disaster, large and small. Obviously, we can't eradicate the causes of downtime, but it's our mission to lessen the pain and get your users back to their feet when disaster strikes, whether the disaster is man-made or whether it's man-made or a natural disaster. So let's talk about the cloud failover appliance. What we've done with it and what it is a thin cloud edge appliance with built-in backup, archiving, and endpoint protection with failover services included. And so the reason we say it's thin is it really speaks to the need, what Carla earlier was talking about with cloud failover. You don't necessarily need a 10 terabyte appliance to protect 10 terabytes of data. You can get by with a 4 terabyte appliance and leverage the cloud to store and archive the remaining data. So what does it do? It allows you to boot critical servers and applications from the cloud or the appliance in the event of an outage. And so what makes it cool? You can recover in seconds. Takes a little longer if you're recovering from the cloud. It does support a wide variety of environments, including VMware, Hyper-V, Windows, and Linux. It's super affordable and comes with military encryption baked right in. So we're going to talk a little bit about the pricing. Now, we don't have the pricing outlined here, but the pricing starts right around $2,500 for the appliance, and then it comes with a monthly subscription service as well. We also want to give you a picture of our cloud failover appliance, so here it is. And again, as Carla talked about, it can scale from a few terabytes of protected storage all the way to 88 to 100 terabytes of data as well. But remember, you can bolt on an unlimited amount of cloud storage for long-term and archiving. So again, if you compare this pricing to what you would find with competitive solutions, whether you're talking about Commvault or EMC or Datto, you'll see our pricing compares favorably to any of those leading providers of DRaaS solutions. So let's talk about how the cloud failover solution works. So first of all, we're starting with our end users. They're accessing their data, their applications, and everything is working swimmingly. Then a tornado strikes, right? Now all of a sudden, your servers and applications are down. So what can an administrator do? They can click the button and to generate our push button failover. They then have the ability to either fail directly from the appliance or from the cloud. And they can recover and virtualize those backup VMs and get their users working together. It's just that simple. So next I'm going to walk you through a quick demo of cloud failover appliance in action. So we've pre-recorded this video and it lasts about 3 minutes. I'm going to walk you through the steps as if there was a disaster. So we're walking you through the actual dashboard, and there's all kinds of power and analytics at your fingertips here. And this is where I can go to manage kind of my appliances and my server backup fleet, all from one place. But because I have a data center down, I'm going to navigate to the office with a downed appliance. In this case, we can assume that there's only kind of one server per office. What you can see is that some of these applications are standalone, right? And this one is, you navigate to it really quickly, this one here is actually replicating to the cloud. So let's go to the office that's been flooded, and I'm going to click back into the kind of the cloud side of the appliance now. Now, what you'll notice is I don't have to muck around with VPNs. The Infrascale dashboard gives me all the power to remote these managed environments as well as deploy desktop agents. I'm going to navigate to the Cloud Boot tab where I can see all the servers in the office. Then I can find the server I want to bring up first. In this case, it's an Exchange server. I'm presented with a Cloud Boot wizard, and the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what date do I want to go back to and restore from. So I'm going to choose the most recent backup. Then I'm going to figure my network configuration. I can decide which traffic do I want to accept. In this case, I want to accept any traffic from RDP and SSH. So click that, choose Next. I'm going to set up a notification email when the VM has been spun up. So if this takes 10 minutes or so, I'll be alerted. But as I'll show you, this can happen pretty fast. Now I'm going to go flick over to the Active tab and see if it's already ready, and it is. And the VM has already been virtualized. That's because this is the second time I'm doing this. The first time it may take a few minutes, but after that it gets really pretty zippy. So now let's verify that the Exchange server is actually working. What I'm going to do now is log into Windows Remote Desktop and connect to this particular server. As I log in, I can see see whether or not I actually have network connectivity. I want to, again, ensure that I have both inbound and outbound connectivity. So really the last step here for me is to check that I have outbound connectivity and to ping Google. Okay, so we'll do that here. Double check that we have connectivity. It looks like everything is, all systems go. Let's see if we've got Google up and running. There we go. Just ping Google. Great. So let me kind of quickly review what you just seen. You saw me log into the dashboard. I found the office that was impacted by the disaster. I then found the server that I wanted to bring up, and I cloud booted the server and waited a minute or so. I then logged into the Exchange environment and tested connectivity and make sure that all my users can access that, and so they can get back to work in literally a few minutes while my IT team kind of figures out the root problem of the down server. Cool, that's it. It's as easy as that. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about how we stack up against some of the key competitors in the area of DRaaS. This chart helps summarize some of the key criteria that we think you should be looking at when comparing different DRaaS solutions. As you can see, all the major vendors support booting VMware-based VMs, booting within the cloud. But this is really where the herd starts to thin out. And when you start to look at other criteria like Hyper-V support or the ability to boot from physical environments like Windows and Linux, not everyone can check that box. Of course, if you're looking for a really affordable solution, there isn't much competition, at least based on our own competitive analysis. And the thing that we haven't noted on here, we probably should, Carla, is our ability, the fact that we're the only vendor that is offering a 15-minute failover guarantee. And that's something that we're kind of supremely proud of. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the dashboard.
Yep, so here's a snapshot of the online dashboard. And like you just saw in the demo video that Dean went through, here you can monitor and manage storage and backups. You can manage the successes without a VPN. You can control backups and use our MSI to deploy anywhere in the world with remote deployment. And you can set retention settings for compliance requirements as well. And that's just the beginning. So you have all of your reporting and monitoring in the dashboard, all of your activity alerting. You can even use the rebranding tools, and we have some advanced policy settings in there as well. You can access the dashboard from any browser as well, so you'll always have access to it. So let's do a quick recap of what makes us unique and why you should take a closer look at Infrascale. One is that it's simple. Our product is simple to deploy, easy to use, and we're really easy to work with. US-based support, simple online resources, a single dashboard. It's also very flexible. We support any OS, protect every device. We let you deploy how and where you want to deploy. And it's affordable. So you do the math, but really you'll find that our integrated appliances are as much as 60% less than the EMCs, the Commvaults, the Dattos, and the Unitrends of the world if you want to sit out and do all the calculations. There are no hidden fees, support's included, there's no vendor lock-in, so it's really built for growth for your company. But you don't have to take our word for it. Like we already mentioned, we were named Gartner Cool Vendor for 2015. Also, Storage Switzerland and ZDNet have recognized us. So with that, I have just a couple of next steps for you. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. The last thing that we have is the Q&A, but I do want to offer a free CSA evaluation unit for all of you who joined us today. So you can use the webinar question tool and just type in your name, your email address or phone number, however you best want us to contact you, and just say, hey, I want a free eval unit or I want a free CFA, and we'll definitely give you a call or email and set that up for you. So just again, use the question tool in GoToWebinar to request that. And with that, we'll just turn it over to the Q&A for the end of the presentation here. We have our sales engineer, Aaron Jordan, on the line with us to take some of these technical questions as well.
Great, thanks, Carla. The first question we got was about the location of our data centers. Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about where our data centers are?
Yeah, so we've got 13 data centers worldwide, about half more in the United States, so you can get redundancy within the states. And then we have a Canadian data center, UK data center, Australian data center, South African data center, to name a few. But the idea is, if you come to us from another country where the law states that you have to keep the data in your country, we assume that it's a given. So we're not going to, nail you for extra charges simply because you have to be compliant to your country's laws. So we were very verbose in where you can deploy that data.
Great. The next question is from Eric. Eric asks, if you're spinning up a VM based off of a previous backup, what happens to new data? In the example you did with the Exchange server, what will happen to new emails sent and received once the main site comes back online?
That's got to be the best question I've ever been asked, actually. I've never had anyone ask me a good one like that before. So, sorry, I don't mean to beat up other people's questions, but so it's a good question. So what happens is the backup is still running. So it's still phoning home, still sending the data, and it's still doing snapshots. So let's say that, one, you need to maybe quiesce the data, or and I would do more a SQL thing, but bring the incremental data into this Exchange server. You can simply migrate or merge that data in, but more importantly, when you do like a recovery to get all that new data out, when you bring down the machines, you actually can export the VMDK with the changes, the slight changes, and it creates that new recovery point. And so because we're using synthetic data and we're pushing along change block tracking, you'll ensure that even just that new data after the fact gets pushed over intelligently, so that it's just having to push up a little bit of information as it starts to add that information. So that's actually a really good question, Eric. Thanks for that. I appreciate it.
And just before I read the next question, I want to remind everyone the person who asks the most on-topic questions is going to receive that free prize. So we are giving away a Kindle at the end of the Q&A, so definitely be sure to ask lots of on-topic and relevant questions. So next, I see a question from Jason. He says, can you speak to how your solution will work in a geographically diverse company? So it looks like Jason has 70 different sites that rely heavily on a VDI environment. Does your solution support such an environment?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways we can tackle this one, and I'd actually like to be on the phone for this one because we could spend hours on it. But for long and short of it, there's a couple approaches. Depending on how much data is on each individual site, we'll determine if we want to do more of a direct-to-cloud approach, agent-based, or you can deploy multiple virtual appliances on different sites and keep those virtual appliances small. And this way, you're not buying huge appliances on each site. And then what you can do, and it's my favorite setup, is you go into like a terminus point, right, your data center, and build a big VMware server or a Hyper-V server, and then deploy multiple virtual appliances on that, and that'll be the spot that receives the incoming data from the different sites. So now you've got local data backup, local data spin up, and then you've got a terminus point in your data center where everything goes to that point. And in this case, it would be more of a private cloud, right? And then you'd be able to deploy or respin up all that data in that site as well. So that's usually one of the larger builds that would do that, but there are options, right? So there are other ways to do it than that, but that's just off the top of my head.
And then another question, is there a mobile app for emergency remote booting from a tablet or a phone? What if I'm on vacation?
Oh, yeah, so the website is you can get it on any mobile device. It's HTML5 based. So you just log on in with what your existing credentials are, and all those buttons work. I know because I did it on my phone on a demo last week with somebody. So it could definitely work. And I was able to jump into the machine, and then again, because it's all Java based, I just hold my finger down over the thing, and that's the same as a right click, and then I just click boot. So yeah, it's not a difficult thing to do.
Great. Ismail asks, how does backup archive affect network speeds for users during business hours?
So the good news is there's throttling, and that's probably what the answer that you need to hear anyway, right? Because you need to make sure your backups are still going. So because the system itself leverages other machines or the local machines individually, it's kind of like the load is spread across multiple machines, and then once it hits the appliance, that's when it does the global dedupe. So that hard processing is done isolated from the rest of everything else. And then when it pushes off site, where the network comes into play, that's when that information will be throttled if you'd like to throttle that.
Oh, on a related question, Fred asks, what is the minimum bandwidth requirements of your solution?
So really, I like saying 5 megabits per second, but really because we have the throttling capabilities and you can trickle the data, it doesn't really matter, right? You have that local data stored with the appliance, so you can push up on your schedule. Maybe front load at night, only a little bit of time, or seed if you need to get that initial push up.
Anthony asks, is Infrascale HIPAA compliant?
Right, so the important thing about HIPAA is establishing the chain of custody of the data, right? That's what the key is. So the way Infrascale helps you with that is, number one, we don't have access to the passwords of information of the data. And most importantly, number two, the data is encrypted 256-bit AES locally, sent over an SSL, and then encrypted again at 256-bit AES, where we don't have access to the encryption keys or the passwords, right? That's all on your side. And then, of course, if you want to take it a step further, you can use UltraSafe Max, where you not only define the password, but you define the encryption key itself. So the answer is yes, all of our data centers comply with Sarbanes-Oxley, SAS-70, SSAE16, ISO 27001 and 27002, etc. But you know, as long as you guys are making sure that you don't give your keys away to somebody, you're golden.
You know, one thing we didn't actually talk about is actually what's on screen. And we're actually giving away a free evaluation unit of CFA. So now I'm actually apparently repeating myself, repeating Carla, because she did mention this. But if you do want it, just again, to reiterate, just send us an email in the Q&A tool, as Ed has done. Give us your email address and say, yeah, sign me up for one of those free CFA evaluation units. We now have another question from Eric. He asks, how does IP addressing redirect from the main site to the VM site, that is, on the Exchange scenario? Do you need to change MX records?
Another really good question. So I like this guy. So the MX, you might want to change the MX records. The important thing to note here is a flow of IP traffic. So in this instance, you would probably have the MX records have a pointer to go from one spot to another using like a NAT rule, or in fact, in the MX records, you can actually change the new IP address right then and there, which is probably smart. Alternatively, you can set up a site-to-site VPN. So if it's local processing and bringing information, it can still work site-to-site with your other machines. But for external traffic, this is where the public IP comes in. And again, you'll want to point your MX records temporarily. You can have, have that pre-configured, waiting for the IP address, and then make it go live when that comes on online. But yeah, definitely something we could discuss when you come across that. Our support is 24/7, and we'll have somebody that can help you with that if that arises. So good question. Thanks, Eric.
Okay, we have Robert who says, Datto doesn't let me back up laptops, particularly roaming laptops. Can you do that?
Right, so we have an agent-based system that can push it back to the cloud. So you can install on Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, send that data directly to the cloud. If you want, you can always use FQDN on the appliance and pull in roaming things, so when the laptop comes back or uses a VPN, it doesn't forget where it left off. It can continue on.
So here's a question regarding VMware backup. Is ESXi compatible with VDI?
So VDI is the VMware's basically, it's like Horizons, I believe, right? That's where you can deploy multiple machines on a single infrastructure, and then it's basically all terminal service between the machines. So the way we work at that is, if it uses the vStorage APIs, it should work. I've never actually been asked that question. That's another really good one. But because our appliance uses the vStorage APIs, It basically speaks VMware's language. It's how it does all the work. And it just simply acts as a smart repository for that data. And then we can do the global dedupe and the synthesification of the data before it sends it off to the cloud. So it's one of those things where I'd want to look at, and before I say absolutely, but the good news is you can always install on the agent level or the agent on the guest level and pick it up just fine. So I'm looking at the high-level host level to make your life easier, but I can guarantee it'll work on the agent level.
Henry asks, can this product be white labeled?
So direct-to-cloud can definitely be white labeled, and that would basically be whatever you sell to the smaller end users or you know, the medium-sized businesses where they're just looking for a direct-to-cloud solution. So that will be labeled with your own logo, your own icon, banner across the top. Customize the email recipient. Even your dashboard can be rebranded, so when you redirect people there, they see no Infoscale, they see your company.
Great. David asks, how is DNS handled?
So similarly, basically, you're going to want to use something that, let's in this case, let's say that the Active Directory server comes online and it's handing out IP addresses. So by default, it will bring the machines that come up on a bridge network from the appliance, and then you would just jump into the appliance and then reconfigure that specific machine to now be the originating machine. And then from there, it can facilitate the same requests that it was doing beforehand. Now, if it's because the machine needs to use DNS to be able to you know, speak to everything else, you can use a site-to-site VPN, or again, go in and configure the IP addresses, and then again, they're speaking to one another as if nothing had changed.
Great.
Good question. I like that one. Who was that again? That was a good one. Sorry. I like that one.
Yosef asks, what sort of dedupe efficiency do you get?
So this depends on what you're backing up, right? So if you're backing up like image files and video files, there's not much dedupe, but that's just the nature of the beast. It's already compressed. But if you're talking like Word docs, CAD files, things that have a lot of micro changes as they're changed, it can go anywhere from 2 times by default. On some of our demo appliances, I've got 50 and 100 times, and that's just because the more you use it, the more dedupe you get. So it really depends site to site, but generally 2 to 10 times is our golden rule.
Amy asks, so this combines DR, backup, and archiving into one solution, and we haven't really spoken much on archiving.
Right. So the DR allows you to store as much data as you want locally on the appliance, and then also in the cloud. So it's untethered, so you can do whatever you want with either one, right? But the physical appliances also have the ability to allow you to use one of the disks in the RAID array as a hot swappable disk to send a job directly to, and then you can pull that disk out and like take it to Iron Mountain or store it underneath your mattress or whatever you feel comfortable with. But also you can plug in a USB disk and get the same feel, right? So I can put a USB disk in the back of my appliance, send a job directly to that, and now I've got my tape but modern feel for archival that I can just hide. And it's usable for seeding data back as well, so it's multi-purpose.
There was a follow-up question from Randy as far as archiving. Because what kind of controls do you have for setting the retention policies, or the amount of data retained?
So within the client setting of the appliance, each individual machine or as a group, you can set the policies. So I can say I want this Exchange server to keep more fulls this month and more differentials for the next couple weeks, and like 6 or 7 incrementals for the next few days. And then transversely or conversely on the cloud, I can set my own granular set of rules. And I can do that for group machines or individual machines, but the point is you can log in and change those independently.
Henry asks, what is the basic time frame for data recovery for voice products? And then he adds call center and voice systems.
So as long as it's got one of the supported operating systems, or if it's running on a hypervisor, it depends on how big the machine is, right? So if it's a physical Windows, I can spin it up and boot it on the appliance. If it's a virtual machine, I can boot on the appliance. And then I can take my sweet time rebuilding, right? And I just push back the incrementals when it's done. But if it's one of those outliers like AIX where you actually have to take the time to rebuild, it depends. If you can rebuild the AIX box in a few minutes and then push back the data, it's really the answer to that question is how fast is your network, right? Because it's just a matter of seeding through your network. So the limiting factor there would be if you have a 1 gigabit Ethernet LAN, then you're stuck at 1 gigabit Ethernet. But if you have a 10 gig Ethernet and it's bonded, so you're pushing about 20 through, then you can fly, right? So it really depends on your network at that point and your resources available.
Great. And Henry asks, what is your disaster recovery for a catastrophic site failure?
So, can you repeat the first part of that question?
Yeah, the question is what is your disaster recovery for a catastrophic data center failure? I'm presuming Henry's asking about what is the process or how does your system work for that?
Right, okay, so it depends on where you go, local or in the cloud. They're very similar, but the end game is slightly different, right? So long story short, let's say that my local appliance is still online and I just lost a machine. Let's say that my VMware server it's got bad RAM. So I can go in, I can check to see if, if I can get it right away. Maybe I got to run a fries, but in the meantime, business can't be down. So I boot that machine on the appliance. I make sure the network, everything's pointed right. They're running. They're up in minutes, right? So they're running it. You're the hero. Now you have time to go ahead and get that RAM. So you take off, get the RAM. At the end of the day, you put the RAM in. You bring the VMware server up, and thank God the data is not corrupt, right? So at that point, all you need to do is push back the change block. So you would be able to power the machine down, the virtual machine, right-click it, create a backup job. Then from that moment on, it takes all the data from the moment you started it to the moment you powered it off. It creates a single differential, which is a new snapshot. Then you can just simply feed that differential back to the appliance, or excuse me, the hypervisor, and it's just a change block tracking. So it takes minutes, right? You're full strength again in no time. Let's say a meteorite hits the site. That site is a crater. It doesn't exist anymore. You need to go to the cloud because their business is on the East Coast, and that meteorite hit the West Coast. So sorry to see them go, but you need to keep business running, right? So they come online. You need to go to the cloud. You log into your cloud interface. You click on the cloud boot option that you saw in the video that Dean showed you, and then in this instance, instead of using that the bridge network with the VNC port, you're actually using and redirecting that traffic. You're actually using a public IP, and so then you just create a rule if it's Exchange server using Exchange AMX records, etc. Right? And you just point that to the new location. Everyone starts working, or you turn on a VPN if you happen to have the VPN installed, right? And it's a site-to-site VPN. But the point is, it's up and running, and now you're in a scenario where you need to bring it back down, right? So the cool thing about the cloud is I can export a VMBK in real time, and I'm sorry it's taken forever to get to this, but this is a big question. But you can export the VMBK and then use that to reseed or whatever the machine is, and use that to reseed the build. And this way, so that machine's back up online locally while it's still running in the cloud, and then once you can power it down that night or that weekend, you can then use that to only push the change block. So either way, the goal is to get the bulk of it ready and standby up so that you only ever have to push change blocks so you're kicking your feet up in the meantime. I hope that answered your question.
The shorthand version of that is that the fail back is just as simple as the fail over. And so that's a long-winded but very descriptive description of that. Eric, kind of follow on that, says you just mentioned 10 gig Ethernet as well as bonded 10 gig. What is the connectivity on the appliance? Is this modular?
So if you want, you can actually get on the larger appliances 1 or 2 10 gig Ethernet cards. And if you decide to pick those up, then when you put those in, you can decide if you want to bond those Ethernet cards. So by default, it's a 1 gigabit Ethernet card with 4 ports. You can get 2 1 gig Ethernet cards with 2 ports. You can get a 10 gig card with 2 ports, or you can get 2 10 gig cards with 2 ports. Those ports are just Ethernet ports, but you can also get them with CX4 and also fiber. And then you can, of course, like I said, bond those. So you can have a dedicated in and a dedicated out to make sure your appliance is pushing. At that point, you just need to make sure you got enough RAM to be able to facilitate it. But a 9500 fully maxed out with 2 10 gig E's can push that easily.
And just to follow up, Henry just asked, and I think you answered it, is can you have a fiber connection?
Yeah. So the 10 gigabit Ethernet cards have CX4, Ethernet, and fiber on both of them, on all 3 on that same card. And so if you get 2 of them, you get the choice for both, or on both. Yeah, I won't get into the single versus multi-mode, but that all exists too. Go on.
Great. The next question from David asks, how does VMware SRM come into play with Infrascale? So again, everything is basically using the vStorage APIs. So if the vStorage APIs can speak to it, then so can we. I have to admit, SRM is an acronym I'm not aware of, so I'd have to find out what exactly that is, and I can get back to you. I can tell you about DPS and DPM, but and all those others, but I don't know what SRM is, so I apologize.
Okay, maybe David could specify a bit on that.
I can look it up. Give you 30 seconds.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Ismail asked, is there a setting to allow high priority backups versus lesser valued data if space is limited? Do you provide additional space as needed and notify the business?
Yeah, so as you start to run out of space, you're given warnings. If it's a downstream client that's doing this for, it's getting warnings. Things, yeah, I looked it up, Site Recovery Manager, thanks. We'll get into that in a second. Yeah, so you can actually give warnings and notifications, and then, and this is really important compared to a lot of our competitors. InfraScale isn't heavy-handed with forcing your hand in cutting your clients off if you go over. If you go over, we'll warn you, we'll let you know, but we're not going to nail you, because look, if their data gets like not backed up and you approach them and say, I need more money, and in the meantime they lose a file, do you think they're going to recover, renew with you or buy more data? Probably not. So we allow that to go, and then you can facilitate the, hey, I need you to upgrade this, and then from there we can make it square. So we're patient. We understand you're a growing business, and we're not going to gouge you because you're busy. That's a great sign.
Okay, so a question Susie asked, which a question we hear all the time, is she's with a government agency, and she's asking about what do we mean by security and military-grade encryption. Can you kind of expound more on that?
Yeah, so military-grade encryption is anything that uses, I believe it's 128-bit or over encryption, but 256-bit AES has basically become the standard. That is what you consider top secret grade. So 256-bit AES is the encryption of choice for military-grade encryption. And then, of course, transfer over SSL and then back again in 256-bit. So that's what we mean by when we say military-grade encryption. It's the level of encryption that we utilize.
So you encrypt the data then, Aaron, as it goes from the site to our data center. But do we also encrypt it at the data center itself?
Right. So it's encrypted locally at 256-bit, and then it's sent over at 128-bit on an SSL. Unless you have a higher level certificate that you've encrypted, that's a story for another day. And then again at 256-bit AES. So you're hit multiple times with encryption to make sure that they have to do a lot of legwork to get anywhere near it. So I want to talk about that site manager again real quick if I can, because I looked it up and I got some information. So basically it seems to be like a giant, like a site manager. It's like a giant vCenter server, right? And because it uses the vStorage APIs, I'm sure it'll work. You could definitely do the agent approach, like I mentioned earlier with the VDI deployment. But the host level backup, I'm sure it'll work. I say that because I know it works with the vCenter server to the effect that if I point to a vCenter server and DRaaS and DPM kick in, where it's migrating VMs between hypervisor hosts, because it's making sure that you're not using all your resources or equally using resources, right, saving you some power and whatnot. It'll actually keep track of that and know, so it doesn't have to do new backup, et cetera. And so from what I've seen is the Site Recovery Manager is basically like the high level of being able to recover that and do that. So we should be able to integrate with that, no problem.
Victor asks, how does the MSI work for mass deployment?
So the way the MSI works is you actually can create a policy which defines what you're backing up and when you're backing up and what those permissions are. And then I can take that policy and I can bake it into and install it. And then from there I can tell the installer to also create accounts at specific sizes with specific names. And then I can apply that MSI to the Active Directory's group policy object. And then I can set the permissions for it. And then when, like, let's say Carla logs in, she's in marketing. So marketing will have their specific set of rules and their specific MSI. When Carla logs in, it says, okay, this is Carla. She's got permissions to install the marketing one. Is it installed? No. Go ahead and install it. And then while you're installing it, capture the Windows username, randomize a password, phone it home, create the backup account with the predetermined size, then configure the software after you've installed it, and then run a backup in the background. And then and send all that information to the dashboard so you can keep track of it. So that's how the MSI is deployed, right? So you just build an MSI, set it up with permissions, and then let the work begin. Let them do all the work themselves.
Great question, great answer. Is there multi-login for different departments, users versus support staff? This is from Henry.
So with regard, I'm assuming in this instance you've got a bunch of IT guys that work for your MSP and you want to be able to be the king of the hill and let them be kind of like other admins. So the way you can do that is, number one, you can create companies, and then those companies can be basically groups, right? And you can group individual users in that. With the dashboard, I can also make you additional administrative logins with the dashboard. And then with the appliance, it's Linux-based. You can jump in and create your own additional administrator users there if you want. By default, they're they come in one, but if you need more, we can help.
Great. Unfortunately, I think we've run out of time. It's a great set of questions, and there's a number of questions we didn't quite get to. We promised to. The other favor we have is if you're looking for any kind of some additional information from us. Obviously, if you were looking for the evaluation unit, many of you have let us know that. But if you're looking for just some additional information about our cloud failover appliance, or information about Infrascale, or information about partnering with us, again, use that Q&A tool, let us know, provide us your information, and we'll happy to have someone reach out to you in the next few days and answer any of your remaining questions or provide you the information that you're looking for. And so with that, Carla, I think we're going to call it a wrap.
So we'll go ahead and announce the winner of the Kindle. Let me go ahead and just tally up the numbers. We'll announce that in just a few seconds. So the winner of our Kindle today is Eric Carlson. So Eric, congratulations. We'll go ahead and email you this afternoon to confirm your address for the mailing for that. So congratulations. With that, I think we'll say thank you again to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Aaron, for being here and answering all those questions. And we very much look forward to working with you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.